At 12:17 a.m. on June 18, 2010, Ronnie Lee Gardner sat strapped to a black metal chair inside Utah State Prison, a black hood covering his face. A target was pinned to his chest. 5 trained marksmen stood behind a brick wall, 25 feet away. 4 of their rifles carried live rounds. 1 did not. They fired in unison. The .30 caliber bullet struck Gardner's chest, and within moments, the man whose crimes had shocked Utah was pronounced dead. But to understand the haunting silence of his final moments, we must go back to the blood-soaked trail he left behind, one that began with a single gunshot in a Salt Lake City bar. In the autumn of 1984, 23-year-old Ronnie Lee Gardner walked into Cheers Tavern, a small bar in Salt Lake City. It was a robbery, but Gardner wasn't there for cash alone. High on cocaine and adrenaline, he pulled out a gun and shot bartender Melvin Otterstrom in cold blood. Otterstrom, a father of 2, never stood a chance. The sound of the gun thundered. He died instantly. Gardner was the villain to Otterstrom's hero. You see, just to provide for his family, Otterstrom was a controller for the Utah Paperbox Co. by day and a per-time bartender by night. Sadly, in this case, the hero couldn't carry out a sneaky escape. For many criminals, this would have been the end of the line, a chance to flee, get caught, and face the law. But for Gardner, it was only the beginning. It was about to get worse. He was arrested and charged with capital murder. Yet what happened next would take his story from tragedy to infamy. On April 2, 1985, Gardner was being transported to the courthouse for a hearing in the Otterstrom murder case. But he wasn't planning to attend quietly. Smuggled into his possession was a handgun, slipped to him by an accomplice in a courthouse restroom. Jim Klein of the Salt Lake City Fire Department believed that the gun was passed to Gardner as he was being escorted into the courthouse from the underground parking lot. Before he could have pulled out the gun and opened fire, he was immediately shot in the right shoulder by guard Luther Hensley. Gardner then shot unarmed bailiff George Nick Kirk in the abdomen. After running to the courtroom archives, Gardner confronted attorneys Robert Macri and Michael Burdell. According to Macri, after Gardner pointed the gun at him, he changed aim to Burdell, who had been doing pro bono work for his church. Burdell yelled. Then with precision, Gardner shot him in the eye. Burdell died about 45 minutes later while in surgery at Holy Cross Hospital. Burdell was another victim who also happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Gardner made his way outside, but was quickly surrounded and recaptured. But the damage was done. 2 men were dead, another was wounded, and Utah now had a high-profile killer in its custody, one who had shown he was capable of murdering not just strangers, but anyone in his way. The trial and sentencing Gardner was charged with 2 murders, Otterstrom and Burdell. He was convicted of both. But it was the courthouse shooting, yes, the brutal and public killing of Michael Burdell that earned him the death penalty. It seems God was trying to get him back for killing one of his own. In Utah at the time, death row inmates could choose their method of execution. Gardner chose the firing squad. He who kills by the gun must die by the gun. He had told a judge in a 1991 hearing that he was motivated by his children to seek lethal injection, but later changed his mind as they became older. He said that he preferred the firing squad because of his Mormon heritage. Gardner also felt that lawmakers were trying to eliminate the firing squad, in opposition to popular opinion in Utah, because of concern over the state's image in the upcoming 2002 Winter Olympics. In his words, "I like the firing squad. It's so much easier, and there's no mistakes." He claimed it was more humane. Some said it was symbolic, an outlaw's death in the modern era. Others believed it was Gardner's way of controlling the narrative, of leaving the world on his own terms. Whatever the reason, the request was granted. Years passed. Decades, in fact. It was time, and he knew it. 25 years of appeals. Gardner's time on death row stretched over 2.5 decades. He filed appeal after appeal, each one delaying the inevitable. In 2007, U.S. federal judge Tina Campbell rejected Gardner's appeal that his attorneys were inadequate because they were unable to prove that he did not mean to kill his victim. The United States Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit rejected motions for appeal by his defense on March 8, 2010. Gardner attempted to give up the process at least 3 times, but his attorneys convinced him to continue appealing each time. The law had enough when he attempted to murder another inmate, Richard Fars Thomas, in 1994. Gardner stabbed him with a shiv in an attempted murder that once again put him under legal scrutiny. But Thomas survived. Over time, public interest faded. Gardner's name became a legal footnote, mentioned only when hearings resumed or new appeals were filed. But for the families of the victims, Otterstrom's children, Burdel's loved ones, the wait was agonizing. You see, Otterstrom was a mountain climber and veteran of the 19th Special Forces Group of the Utah National Guard. He was survived by his wife Kathy and his 5-year-old son Jason. Burdell, on the other hand, was a Vietnam veteran, former engineer, and member of the Summum Church. He was survived by his girlfriend Donna New, who would go on to advocate against Gardner's execution. In 2010, after 25 years of delays, the Utah Board of Pardons and Parole denied clemency. Governor Gary Herbert signed the execution warrant. The date was set, June 18th. The final days, Gardner was moved to a special isolation cell adjacent to the execution chamber. He requested his last meal, a lobster tail, a steak, apple pie with vanilla ice cream, and a 7-Up. It was served on the evening of June 15th, 3 days before his death. After that, he began a 48-hour fast, both as a spiritual gesture and an act of control. He spent those final days quietly. He read, he meditated, and he watched all 3 Lord of the Rings films back to back. Over 9 hours of fantasy and redemption for a man whose real life offered no such ending. He was visited by his religious advisor and a handful of correctional officers. He reportedly joked with staff, commented on the coldness of his pie, and appeared calm, eerily so. The Utah Department of Corrections provided Gardner's attorney, Andrew Parnes, with documentation about executions by firing squad and lethal injection. The records included the Utah execution team's training and expertise. Parnes relayed the information to Gardner after agreeing not to disclose it to anyone else. At 11:30 p.m. on June 17th, Gardner was prepared for execution. He was strapped into a black metal chair, a black hood placed over his head. A white target was pinned to his chest. 5 anonymous marksmen stood behind a wall, their rifles aimed through small openings. One of the rifles was loaded with a blank round. None of the shooters would ever know if they fired the fatal shot. When asked for final words, Gardner replied, "I do not know." It was the last thing he would ever say. Just after midnight, the command was given. The shots rang out. Gardner's chest convulsed from the impact. Witnesses reported seeing his fingers twitch, his body tense, then fall still.
The boom of the guns, and his fists clenched and then unclenched and clenched a little bit, and then his head fell forward.
At 12:17 a.m., Ronnie Lee Gardner was pronounced dead. Gardner's execution ignited a firestorm of debate. Utah had not used the firing squad since 1996, and Gardner became the 3rd man in the U.S. to die that way since the 1970s. Some called it barbaric. Others called it justice. Human rights advocates argued that the spectacle of a firing squad belonged in the past. But many Utahns, especially the victims' families, felt that justice, long delayed, had finally been delivered. Gardner's family held a private vigil. They did not attend the execution as per his request. His brother Randy, who later became an anti-death penalty activist, would describe the experience as a source of deep personal pain. A commemorative coin was commissioned for prison staff who participated in the execution. Gardner's friends and family gathered outside the prison at a candlelight vigil while playing Free Bird by Lynyrd Skynyrd. Ronnie Lee Gardner lived and died in violence. From a barroom robbery to a courthouse assassination, his crimes left scars that never healed. His execution ended a chapter, but it also opened a new conversation about the ethics of capital punishment, about the humanity of killers, and about the cost of waiting decades for closure. In the end, Gardner refused to speak. He left no apology, no explanation, no remorse, just silence. His body was cremated and released to his daughter to be taken back to Idaho with family members. Defense attorney Andrew Valdez once said, "Ultimately, his children and grandchildren got their chance to express their love for him. I'm not sure Ronnie had a lot of love in his life, at least in the end there. He got that. Was justice served?" Did the firing squad deliver accountability or simply reflect a darker side of our own need for retribution? Tell us what you think. Was Gardner's silence more haunting than any confession? Were 25 years on death row too long or not long enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into the most chilling final moments in true crime history, click here to watch the next video.